In the last few weeks, there's been a lot of Pokemon related drama here on the internet. So, you've probably seen a photo something like this, where there's a creature that looks like it's from Pokemon on one side, and then a Pokemon on the other side. In case you're not a Pokemon fan, the one on the right is a Pokemon, the one on the left is not a Pokemon. So, this new video game called Pal World came out. It's another monster collecting RPG type thing. Think Pokemon, think Digimon, there's a whole bunch of them. But it's gotten into hot water because its art style is an awful lot like Pokemon. Now, there's been a lot of debate, and I'm not really going to get into that here. People feel weird about Pal World, though. I'll put some links in the description for videos that talk about that. So, for a few weeks, people have been alleging now that these models of the Pal World characters might be directly ripped from the Pokemon games. This mostly comes off of this one tweet, which is someone showing a video comparing the Pal World models to the Pokemon models and saying that they matched up in terms of the shape. However, the vertices, which are, if you didn't know, all of 3D models are made up of tiny little dots in 3D space. Those tiny dots didn't match up. So there's really no logistical way that these are the original Pokemon models, but that has led to people secondarily stating that they could be kit bashing together multiple Pokemon and then essentially digitally tracing on top of them. Now, I'm not an expert 3D modeler. I don't do it as a job. That I've just been learning over the last couple of years how to do 3D modeling, and I've put some of that on this YouTube channel. I was thinking about it and I thought, well, I understand the tracing concept. I understand how you would, quote, digitally trace, unquote, something in a program like Blender. However, what I don't know is whether or not that would be more efficient than just making the model by yourself. So that's what we're going to test out today. I'm going to take some Pokemon models, I'm going to mash them together, and then I'm going to trace them. And then after that, I'm going to sculpt a creature similar to that model that I mashed together from scratch, and we'll see what the results are, the differences, and how everything looks. So let's just get started because this intro's going on a little bit too long. So we'll be making our model based off of some of these fusions that I made when I was a teenager. I used to make a lot of Pokemon fusions by taking the official sprites and combining them together. So this is Chimchar and Zubat combined into one creature, and I have the models for Chimchar and Zubat right here. In my art program, I downloaded them from Modeler's Resource. It's funny, I used to get the sprites from Spriter's Resource, which has all the sprites from all the different Pokemon games. So I just downloaded the models, and you can see that one of them is more detailed than the other. I'll put on screen which Pokemon games each one of them was from, but I couldn't get a Chimchar and a Zubat from the exact same Pokemon game. And some of the models are more detailed than others, so this particular Chimchar has a little bit less detail than like the Zubat does. But I guess I'm just going to make it rather low poly, so kind of fewer vertices, a little bit less smooth. You can see the harsh lines if you look at it from certain angles, but I don't think it's too bad. It's still simple enough shapes that I'm not worried about it looking weird. So as you can see, you can really easily adjust just about everything about the model just using the program Blender. This is a free program, by the way, Blender is. So you can just adjust the size of things. I decided to make one finger a little bit longer, and then I became inspired by the eye, which is a species of primate. So I did a few more things later on, more kind of inspired and related to that. I grabbed the tail from Zubat. We're just going to stick it on the back of Chimchar, just like the drawing. And, I'll be adjusting some of the elements. You can see how significantly you can change the tail And a lot of these elements, I'm using the tool that you can see in the top. There's like a highlighted little circle with lots of circles in the center, and that allows you to move the adjacent vertices as you're moving a single vertex in like a similar way. So basically that's what's allowing me to push and pull everything kind of all at once. A really handy tool if you use Blender, just so you can kind of adjust your model. And yeah, that was like the major tool. I added some little tufts to his face just to kind of, I don't know, I feel like they're just tufts all over all sorts of Pokemon. So that's my one little addition. And the other major change that I made was putting the wings just underneath the arms instead of like separate, as in like the original sprite that I made. We've just put the wings underneath the arms, we've put the thing on top of his head, onto his tails, and then I've just kind of mixed up the model here and there. As you can see, it's like super easy to adjust the model with just a few times to make it look fairly different. So after I finished up the first version, I retopologized it. Again, I am not an expert 3D modeler, so I apologize if anybody finds this cringe. I also think that there might be programs to make retopology faster, but I don't know how to use any of them, so I'm just doing it by hand for both 3D models. And I did look at the Pokemon model, the original Pokemon model, for reference as to how they do their vertices, like how big a lot of their sort of polygons are. I mean, this particular model was very minimal, but I just kind of wanted to match the amount of minimalism. Not exactly where all the vertices are, obviously, it's going to be matched, but I tried to keep it in the same style, essentially. And that helps later on, I think, with the secondary version. I also feel like I learned a lot from this. There's a YouTuber that I found when I was looking up to see if other people had done similar videos, and there is a YouTuber who I'll link below. I forget their name, but I'll try to put it on screen. That did a video talking about making fake Pokemon and how you could download the models from the Spriter's resource, which is where I got my models from. And I haven't watched that video. I watched the first like 10 seconds of it to see what it was about. But he does talk a little bit about at the beginning that it's useful to study, essentially studying the masters, as it were. So it was pretty useful to look at how they had topologized their pocket monster and use that for my own. I do think that was pretty helpful. Oh, I added this little mouth to, I did this mouth to the character, similar to the original Zubat Pokemon. Yeah, the putting together of the model, all of the little pieces, that took about 40 minutes. It took me like 2 hours to finish this retopology, so I hope you appreciate that I edited it down to as little as I possibly could while still showing you what was going on with it. Okay, so I have done some work off camera, just finishing up this little guy, adding some details to his face. I couldn't figure out exactly how I wanted it to be. So now it's more inspired by the eye, like I said before, but I think, you know, it's got a lot of stuff from the original Chimchar patterns, essentially. Um, you know, he has a little mouth. He's got a face on his back. I just like faces on the backs of little creatures. I thought that was like maybe a fun touch. Um, and then the other big thing I did was I added this little armature. So this is him in rest position, right? So this is the model that I was working on before, and then we've got him in a little pose, and I did an animation of him. You know, it's just an idle animation. To give him some life. You know, his little mouth opens and closes, wings, you know, he looks like he's floating. I think I'm gonna say this guy, I've been calling him Chimbat. I don't have a better name for him. He's night and air type. I feel like that seems appropriate as like sort of a extension copy inspiration. You know what I mean. This is not the end of this experiment. I said that there were two things that I wanted to see. Whether you could take a Pokemon model and turn it into, you know, another creature. See how feasible that is. But I also want to see, if you just make it from scratch, how hard is that? So that's the second thing I'm going to do. I have our little Chimbat right here. His armature and everything. And I'm just going to go ahead, stuff them all into this collection. Let's get the camera out. We're gonna take this, and we're gonna turn that off for a little while. So after this, I am no longer going to go and look at my trace Chimbat. I want it to, that's gonna stay in the background. We're not gonna look at that. I'm also not going to re-import the models. Now, I do want to have a look-see at the models. So we're basically going to make this second version from scratch, but just assuming that we looked at the Pokemon models for reference, not that we put them into our program and that we traced them, but basically how easy would it be for me to just look at the models and then attempt to copy them by eye. This is going to be like one of our references. We're not putting them in the program. We're just gonna like look at them by eye, see if we can copy them by looking at them. You know, like if you were doing a still life or something like that. And then we are going to probably try and copy this sort of fairly closely by eye and not do all of the manipulations that we did to the other one, just because I want to see, you know, the comparison between them if you took the model and then edited it versus if you just tried to copy the model, what that would look like. And, oh, I forgot to switch back to Blender. Okay, so we're back in Blender. We're going to reference those photos that we took before, and then we're going to sculpt this basically out of these little boxes. This is how I do sculpting. There are different ways to do sculpting in Blender. Like I said, I'm not an expert in this, but you know, I know enough to probably be able to do something similar to Chimchar. So I make my 3D models with this pretty simple technique. You'll see it in a lot of tutorials where you, first of all, things are mirrored, and then I'll put an armature on them to pose them later, and then I use a subdivision tool, which it basically turns a cube into a sphere ickle thing. That's the best I can do to explain it really quickly, and this model will basically be entirely like this, just making squares and then reducing them into smaller and smaller shapes, and then tracing over it later, like we did the first one. Again, just referencing this. Okay, so during the last while I was recording me making this, I know that you saw the beginning portion of that, but unfortunately I had switched to Clip Studio Paint. I had been looking at this reference showing you, and I forgot to switch off of it. So basically all of the footage of me making this is lost because it's just a video of me um doing it's just a video of me in Clip Studio Paint with my mouse moving around because I'm making this in the other program. So I figured I should let you know how this went. So this took about an hour, maybe like about an hour total. A lot of fiddling here and there. So these are all just squares, and then you can see I've used subdivision to make them a little bit more shapely. And you can use a few little modifiers. There's mirrored. This is just the exact same way I made the tufts for the other one. The body, this is pretty simple shape. It's basically a weird square rectangular pyramid thing, and then you put subdivision on it and it's magically a much cooler thing. There's the arms. These are again just squares. There is the legs. These are, again, just squares. I think you're probably seeing a pattern. These wings, so this was actually made using the solidify tool. I basically made a flat plane, and then you can go ahead and use the solidify tool to make that like thick. And then I applied the solidify tool, and now it's this nice little tight 2D object. And all of these vertices, I could probably go ahead and minimize these so the edge of the wings are squares. It's all squares. Everything is squares. You probably, I think you saw me make this. This is also squares. They're all squares. End of story. This whole thing is just made out of squares. Now, all I have to do is retopologize this. Take a plane, and then I'm going to snap it to the surface, and then I'm going to basically remake the entire thing. And that'll enable me to put an armature on it and do like a little animation. So after we do all of that, we will have a basically matching version to the first one, and then we're going to compare them, but we're only going to compare them after we do the retopology and the armature and everything like that. So I will be back talking to you in a few minutes, and we'll just fast forward through retopology because you've already seen that anyways. So these are my buddies, Chimbat, Chimchar, and Chimbat. Oh, and Zubat's over here too. So the results of our extremely unscientific experiment, I guess, are, well, I mean, it took me a fairly similar amount of time to do both of these. This one took about 40 minutes. This one took like 55 minutes. Retopologizing is always going to take the most time, and if you're retopologizing anyways, I don't exactly know why you would trace over existing models. At least if your, character is a fairly simple shape, just visually referencing the models is easy enough. And I mean, I was referencing this quite closely, so it did take me an extra amount of time for that. If I had just tried to maybe copy more of like a sketch or what I had in my head, I didn't have any sketch. I didn't have any like preliminary artwork for what this was going to look like. I created that entirely from scratch and by looking at this model of Chimchar but not tracing it. And then this was just made from the tracing of Chimchar's model after editing it. So, is it possible to take the Pokemon from somewhere and trace over them in an art program? It is. You could definitely do that. I mean, don't pass it off as your own. I think it's a good learning experience because you really learn how, like, the Pokemon Company sort of topologizes everything, and you can get those models all for free on the modeler's resource, like I said. I feel like I learned a lot from this, and I'd love to do something like this again. Just maybe like model more Pokemon or use more Pokemon models for something. That would be super interesting. I also made, oh, I also made this. I also made this version. This is just the Zubat colors. So he's just totally Zubat. And these all do, he has a very chill fly. This new one, I think altogether, this one came together a lot more cohesively than this one feels like it did. Maybe the way I chose to edit some of the pieces didn't mesh together well. I don't know. I think this one looks a little bit better. Or maybe I just had a better idea of what I was doing at that point. So yeah, I guess that concludes the end of my highly unscientific experiment where I try to figure out whether or not you can craft a Pokemon. And the answer is you can craft a new Pokemon out of the pieces of old Pokemon, but why would you? That's the honest answer. I mean, I'm not, once again, please no discourse in the comments. Feel free to talk about how you feel. I'll put videos in the description. But yeah, this is just my take on it, my highly unscientific experiment. If you want to do something like this yourself, link me to it because I'd be interested. I mean, I love the idea that more people could, be interested in 3D modeling because of this, maybe. I had no idea about the spriters, or the modeler's resource. The spriter's resource is the one for sprites. The modeler's resource, and I think it's a pretty cool thing, that they're collecting a lot of models, and that's really helpful for studying them. So, yeah. I hope you have a good day, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and, bye. Oh, like and subscribe. Okay, now bye.